Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, a podcast that gives a voice to narcissistic abuse survivors. I am Brandon Chadwick, but my friends call me Chad, and thanks for tuning in to this episode. So what is a narcissist, you may ask? Generally speaking, a narcissist is a person who has an excessive sense of how important they are. They demand and expect to be admired and praised by others and are limited in their capacity to appreciate others' perspectives. And guess what? Not all narcissists are made equal. Yes, that is true. Narcissism is a character trait that exists on a spectrum. A small amount of narcissism is healthy, and a person with an unhealthy level of narcissism may be called a narcissist. At extreme levels, it may be diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder. However, for the purposes of this podcast, a narcissist is a person who exhibits narcissistic traits and or a consistent pattern of maladaptive narcissistic behaviors, regardless of whether they meet the diagnostic criterion in the latest version of the DSM manual or have a formal diagnosis. So a person may be referred to as a narcissist on this podcast, even if it is more likely that they have another cluster B personality disorder, such as borderline, histrionic, or antisocial personality disorder, so as long as they exhibit narcissistic traits and behaviors. And now, with all of that out of the way, because that took me a long time to record, you have no idea how many times I tried to record it, let me tell you that there is a survivor named Annie on this episode, and when you think you've heard it all before, Annie emails me and proves me and will prove you all wrong. So get ready for that. It's a really interesting episode, and that will be coming up in a couple of minutes. But before that happens, I just want to thank everyone in the Narcissist Apocalypse community for listening to the show and sharing your thoughts by email, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. So a big shout out to the Narcissist Apocalypse community. And if you haven't left us a review on whatever podcast service you use, Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, CastBox, etc., leave us a 5-star review because it helps out the podcast a lot. If you want to write out a review as well, that would be great. It helps for rankings. And as far as being on the podcast, we still have a little bit of a moratorium. We think we might have come up with an answer to that problem. However, if you want to be part of an episode as quick as possible, we have something called the Narcissist Apocalypse Letters to a Narcissist episode. So to be part of that episode, go to our website, narcissistapocalypse.com, and on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see this floating button. It's hard to miss. It says Send Voicemail. You press that button, you read your letter to a narcissist, it records. It records up to about 5 minutes. So if you need more time, press it again. After you're done, press it as many times as you need to press. Record your letter, and we're accumulating these letters for a volume 2 of that episode. So send in those voicemails, and if you want myself or Melissa, remember Melissa, my old friend Melissa, who's been on the episodes a couple times, we will read your letter instead if you'd like us. So just send it to narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com. And what else is going on? Our website is close to being done. It's possible it could be done by the next episode. I'm hoping that will happen. And besides that, socially, I did not go visit Melissa, as I intended to in Hamilton last week. I could not fall asleep. And when I finally did, I woke up, and then I thought about thought about falling asleep, and I couldn't fall asleep. I put too much pressure on myself. And thankfully, Melissa understood because she's just a really good friend. And I've apologized to her many a time, and I'm going to apologize to her once again. I'm sorry that I didn't come to Hamilton, and I'll make it up to you somehow. One day we'll be recording our shows again. And one last thing. I got a note from a community member this week named Rebecca. So a big shout out to Rebecca. We have been trading emails back and forth for a while. And also I want to say hi to her sister from across the Hudson River. She knows who she is. But Rebecca has sent me this email, and I asked if I was allowed to share it on the show. And she said yes. So here it goes. Here we go. For one whole year, I have been holding on so tightly to my kids, trying to prevent any further trauma, and I have been spinning my wheels with my efforts unheeded. And these are the things that I have learned. 1, any kid in any situation doesn't want to listen to their parents anyway. 2, they will probably never see their dad for the narcissist that he is. He does not abuse them the way he abuses me. 3, the narcissist just throws money at the kids to solve any problems, never taking ownership of the damage he has caused. And number 4, the more I tried to convince my kids to see the wolf, they could only see the sheep. Therefore, I was spinning out of control to protect them when they didn't even see the threat. The less they understood, the more spinning I did, which only proved to my kids that I am the crazy one, as the narcissist has stated several times. But not anymore. I was holding on so tight that they were pulling away from me. I have decided to pull back from them. I will always be there for them, but I need to focus on my bright future. Hashtag superstar narc survivor, exclamation point, exclamation point. So Rebecca, thank you for this email. Thank you for always sharing your story with me. And a big high five and a big virtual hug for your breakthrough. And I'm sure everyone in the Narcissist Apocalypse community is sharing those high fives and virtual hugs with me towards you. Just keep it going. We're all proud of you. You should be proud of yourself. And now I'm going to get out of my own way. Here is my interview with Annie, and I will check back with you when it's all over. Thank you to everyone that has shown up for today's episode. And with me, I have Annie. Thank you for showing up and being a part of the show today, Annie.
Thank you.
Well, I know your story. We had a pre-call. I know everything. Not everything. There's some things I'll ask a little bit of questions about. But now I am rambling, and I am just going to get out of my own way, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. So I guess I will just start at the beginning. My ex and I met on a dating app. It was one of the swipe apps. We matched. He messaged me right away, and we ended up sort of messaging back and forth that first night. I liked him. He seemed okay. He was very chatty and kept the conversation going, which I liked. We had some stuff in common. So at that point, I was in a master's program for disability studies. And when I told him that, he mentioned that he is deaf and that he communicates with sign language. So I thought that was interesting. I had never dated anybody deaf before. I don't know sign language, and I let him know that. But I have some exposure to deaf culture and to sign. I have coworkers who are deaf, and I was sort of active in some disability communities, not the deaf community. So it definitely wasn't a deal breaker or anything like that. So yeah, he seemed okay. There were a couple things in that first message that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But overall, we had an okay conversation, and he gave me his phone number. And so from that day on, we started texting every day. It was actually a month before we met in person. We matched at the beginning of December, so it was around Christmas time, and we both had plans with family and Christmas plans and that sort of thing. So we were just sort of texting back and forth. And in that first week or first couple weeks, he disclosed a lot. So he immediately was telling me really personal, sometimes traumatic stories about his childhood. He was talking about his addiction history. He told me about intimate details about his sexual history. I mean, we were having these really long, 1 or 2 hour conversations every night. He told me about his relationship history, that he had been married and that he and his wife had split up, and that he tried to get back together with her for a number of years, but she didn't want to get back together with him, and that they don't get along at all now, and that since he split up with his wife, he's really made a point of being friends with all of his exes, and he is. All of his friends, as far as I know, are ex-girlfriends. And of all of the exes that I know about of his, he is friends with all of them. And that's something that's a little bit different with him. A lot of times when I listen to stories on the show, I hear stories of people who the person that they're with is slandering their exes or saying that their exes are crazy. But with the guy that I was seeing, it was actually the complete opposite. He spoke in like really glowing terms about all of his exes. They were all amazing women. He was so proud to know them. He was happy that they were still friends. So I liked that, of course, because I thought that showed maturity. You know, he wasn't slandering them or saying anything bad about them. He told me that his last relationship had ended about 6 months before we met, and that the reason it had ended is because he was just totally in love with her, and she had never wanted to make it exclusive. And then he had basically been single for 6 months, and then he met me. So initially, I actually felt really happy that he was opening up to me. And even though the conversations were very one-sided, like I almost felt guilty. I was like, oh, I'm not really sharing anything about myself. Like, I'm not holding up my end of the conversation. But I found when I sort of tried to find an opening in the conversation to talk about me, there never really was one. He was kind of just sending like these huge, long walls of text. And I barely had a chance to like sort of text back to confirm that I was paying attention. And then, you know, he'd just tell a story about himself and then like the conversation would be over. But in spite of that, like overall, my first impressions of him was that he was like just really funny and quirky. He seemed like a super positive guy. Like he was never mad or frustrated or grumpy. Like stress just seemed to like roll off his back. And I liked that he was so chatty because I'm a pretty reserved person. I don't really like talking about myself. So, you know, I appreciated that conversations were really easy with him. He was popular in his communities too. So he has like thousands of followers on social media. And so I kind of felt flattered, like, oh, wow, like this guy who's so popular and gets all this attention has like chosen me to spend his time with. So that was like the first couple weeks, just texting back and forth. And it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks after we started talking that I eventually told him where I work. And I texted him, and he texted back, oh, shit. And then he followed that up with, my brother Jeff works there. Jeff is not his real name. So Jeff is actually someone that I had worked with for about 7 years. We had essentially the same job in the same department. Jeff had started working in the department a few years after I started. And I never really knew him well. Jeff is deaf also, so just because of the language barrier, because I don't know sign language, it was difficult to start a conversation with him. But, you know, I would say we had like a professional, friendly relationship. Like he would smile or wave when we passed in the hallway. And, you know, we had meetings together and we would sort of chat in the meetings when the sign language interpreters were there. And, you know, we'd eat lunch at the same time in the lunchroom. So my impression of him was just, you know, he was just a private, shy guy who just kind of liked to keep to himself. So my ex tells me this, and I was like, oh, my God, like, yeah, of course I know Jeff. Like, we've worked together forever, and, like, his office is just a few doors down from mine. And my ex, like, immediately texts back, and he's like, my brother has a rule that I'm not allowed to date anybody that he works with. And I was like, that sucks. Like, okay, do you not want to continue on with this? Or, you know, like, that seemed like a pretty specific rule. And he was like, my ex was super reassuring, like, no, you know, I really want to see where this goes with you. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, you know, we sort of dropped it. But then over the next few days, you know, he'd sort of bring it up. Like, you know, I'm really worried about what Jeff's reaction is going to be when he finds out, you know, that we're seeing each other. Like, keeping in mind that my ex and I had actually not even met yet. And so, you know, yeah, he was texting me like, oh, he had a conversation with his best friend, who was one of his ex-girlfriends. And he was talking to her about how stressed out he was, about what Jeff's reaction was going to be. And, you know, he brought up like, you know, all relationships end, and, you know, what is it going to be like for you if you have to work with the brother of an ex-boyfriend? Like, aren't you worried about it being a toxic work relationship? And, like, what if Jeff tries to, like, retaliate on you? And I just thought, like, what is this, what conversation are we having? We haven't even met yet. And now we're talking about what my work situation is going to be like when we break up. Like, I just thought it was odd and kind of an overreaction. But, my ex asked me, like, do you think, like, I should tell Jeff now that we're seeing each other? And I'm like, well, we haven't even met. So why don't we meet first, like, see how that goes, and then come up with a plan about what we're going to tell your brother. So he seemed okay with that. So we were setting up a date and time that we were going to meet. We live about an hour apart, so we planned to meet in the middle, and we were going to go for lunch at a restaurant. So we had sort of narrowed down, I think, like 3 places, and he gave me the choice of 3 places where we would meet and asked me to choose one. And so I just, like, randomly picked one, and immediately he shot it down. He was like, no, I don't want to go there. I had a first date there once, and it was really bad. I showed up, and, the girl was high, and he starts telling me this really long, weird story about this date, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, he gave that as one of the options. Pick a different one. It doesn't really matter to me. And, at the time I was just like, oh my God, this guy is so funny. In hindsight, I see that as sort of the beginning of how he navigated our relationship and sort of giving me the illusion of control, but never actually letting me make any decisions. But we set a place for the first date. It's leading up to the date and on the day of the date, like, I was pretty nervous. We had been talking for a month every day. And so I felt like there was a lot riding on it. Like, I was genuinely starting to like him. And I hoped that he would like me. So I show up, we're having lunch. He brought a pen and paper with him. And so that's how we communicated on that first date. Because, of course, I didn't know any sign language at that point. And, it was just mostly like a normal first date, kind of like small talk. I do remember at one point we were talking about tattoos, and I showed him a tattoo idea that I had, and I was pretty excited about it. It was like this really cool, like, woman tree hybrid type of thing, and I'd been working on it for a while, and so I was like, oh, like, look at this, and I showed him a picture on my phone, and he just looked at it, and he, like, wrote down, or it said, like, it's a tree. And, like, very, like, deadpan, and kind of, like, just gave me, like, a so what shrug, and then sat there and stared at me. And I just, like, that reaction was just so unexpected. Like, typically you would expect someone to say, like, oh, that's really neat, or that's cool, but just the way he, like, immediately shot it down and was just so dismissive of it, that's really the first time that I remember feeling, like, shame and stupid about something that I liked. But other than that, like, lunch was fine. We finished eating. He asked if I wanted to go for a walk. So we went to a park nearby, and we went for a walk, and he held my hand, and I just thought that was so sweet. It was like high school, like, nobody had held my hand in so long. And so we walked for a bit, and we were kind of typing notes back and forth on our phones, and eventually we stop and we sit on a park bench. And the bench was sort of in front of a playground, and it was a really beautiful winter day. So there were lots of kids and families sort of playing in the playground behind us, and we're sitting on the bench, and it's really sweet. And, we're writing notes back and forth, and then he leans in to kiss me. And he starts kissing me, but these are not like tentative first date, like, getting to know you kisses. This was like aggressively making out, like, tongue in the back of my throat. Like, it almost hurt. He was kissing me so hard. And so I felt uncomfortable right away, like, first of all, because it was just so aggressive. And also because there were kids playing, like, right behind us. So I stopped him, and I kind of gestured to the kids, like, dude, what the heck? Like, I'm not making out with you in front of children. And he types a note to me on his phone, and he's like, I don't care. I can't hear them. And I was like,
oh my God.
I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I understand you can't hear, but they're there. Like, you can see them, right? Like, it just was so weird, that response. And so he asks me, he's like, do you want to stop? But it wasn't like in a, like supportive way. It was like very accusatory, like not friendly. And so I was kind of like, I wasn't comfortable with it, but also like this was our first date and I didn't want to screw things up on our first date. And so I was kind of like, no, that's okay. But, then he starts like making out with me again and I'm kind of like pushing him away a little bit. And, so he kissed me for a little bit longer. And then he kind of like stopped, stood up, smiled, waved goodbye, walked to his car and drove away. And I was just like, all right, like, so I'm sitting on the park bench after like my face had just been assaulted with this guy's tongue. And then he just like got up and walked and drove away. And I was just like, okay, what the hell just happened? Like, I'm driving home and I was like, yeah, that was like the weirdest first date I've ever been on. And I get home and already he's texted me. He was like, oh my God, like he was totally gaga over me. He couldn't believe how great our date was. He was like, told me that he remembered the way the sunlight hit my hair and that it looked magical. He was like, I have to set up a second date with you right away. Like, I don't want to wait. And I was just like, all right. Like, so I'm starting to doubt my own perception. Like, okay, maybe the date wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Like, it wasn't that it was bad, but
I have one question.
Yeah.
I probably have a million questions, but this is the one question I have right now. Did you think he was socially awkward? And that's what was, did you find that maybe, he's socially awkward. I can deal with that.
Yeah, I think a little bit.
And you also talked to him for almost a full month before, so you knew him well.
Yeah, I felt like I knew him. And also, like, so he, when I met him, like, physically he is similar to his brother. And so I don't know if maybe that, like, there was some familiarity there because of that. Like, I honestly don't know. Like, I kind of just remember thinking, like, I've been dating for a while. I've been on a lot of first dates. Like, it's definitely not the worst one I've been on. I guess, like, in comparison, I was like, it was weird. He was a bit too aggressive. But, like you said, we've been talking for a month. Overall, I like him. Like, I guess I was sort of like, I'll give him a pass on that, maybe, if that makes sense. But yeah, so we set up a second date, and I think it was for like a week later. And our texting, like, definitely started turning more sexual after the first date. So we were talking about what we liked and what we didn't like, what was okay, what was not okay. He told me he thought there's like a pretty decent chance we might sleep together on our second date. And I was like, yeah, I agree. We had made plans to meet at his place. And like, normally I would never like ever consider being sexual with someone on a second date or like even meeting a guy at his place on the second date. But again, like there was that level of intimacy there almost because we've been talking and it wasn't just every day. It was like all day, every day. So he would text me in the morning, we'd check in throughout the day, and then we'd have these super long conversations at night where he was telling me all these really personal things. And so even though we had only been on one date, it seemed like we had known each other for much longer. And also because he was the brother of someone I'd worked with for 7 years. So there was like some familiarity there too. And almost like, I don't know, like the illusion of safety, right? Like nothing bad is going to happen because he knows I know his brother, like, and his brother seemed like a decent guy. So I think like in that respect, I kind of, like moved a little bit faster with him than I normally would have. But anyways, yeah, so it's our second date. I get to his house, walk through the door, take off my coat, and like he starts kissing me. And we made out for like 2 hours. It was like just intensely physical. Eventually we come up for air and he put on a movie. We sort of chatted via pen and paper. He had the pen and paper out again. And we were just talking about like traveling, where we'd been, where we wanted to go. And, eventually it was getting late and I left. And the next day I didn't hear from him. And that was unusual because, like I said, we were texting all day. And so, like, in the late afternoon, I texted him just to be like, hey, I'm just curious, like, how you thought the date went last night. And he told me he was busy, and he texted me back later that night. So it wasn't until, like, 8:30 or 9 that night that I actually heard from him. And when he texted back, he said, the date was fun, but it seemed like more of a hookup. I don't see any long-term potential with you. Didn't ask what I thought. And he mentioned, like, there's always awkwardness in communication when I'm seeing somebody new. And he kind of alluded to the fact that, like, maybe my communication wasn't as strong as he wanted, or, like, I wasn't doing something. And he didn't, like, elaborate. So I was, like, confused. I was like, oh, like, we were just communicating with pen and paper. Like, what did he expect, that I would have learned some signs already? Like, he didn't mention anything about that. And again, this is like my first experience dating someone that's deaf as well. So, I didn't know if there was an expectation or what that was. So he's telling me all this, and I was just kind of like, okay, like, I felt crushed because, I mean, the night had definitely been mutual. He was very dominant. Like, it wasn't me putting the moves on him. But then he kind of shifted it back to me, like, I was just a hookup. So I asked him, like, okay, well, do you want to try again? Like, do you want a third date? And I don't even know how it came up, but he somehow decided that that we would see each other again. But what he was going to do is he was going to set up a 10-date trial. And after the 10 dates, he would decide if I would be his girlfriend. And Lord knows what I was thinking. I have a lot of questions about what I was thinking, but I agreed. And so we started seeing each other like once or twice a week, and it was a trial. Like, he would tell me after every date how many dates we had left. I found out later that he was actually keeping a log of all of our dates. So after each date, he would record, like, what we did, what we ate, if we watched a movie, what movie we watched, like, if we went somewhere, as well as, like, sexual positions or, like, sex acts. Like, it was all in there. And it was after 7 dates that we were texting one night, and he told me that I was his girlfriend. And I was kind of, like, sarcastically as you can be over text, was like, you still have 3 dates to decide that, because I was not impressed with this whole 10-date trial thing. And he said, no, I've decided it's done. And so, like, that was it. Like, I was his girlfriend, and I wanted to be his girlfriend. At that point, I was, like, completely infatuated with him. The love bombing was, like, in full effect. Like, he was texting me constantly, and, like, he would tell, like, he wasn't just happy, right? He was texting about, like, he was blissed out. He was telling me, like, I was the best parts of all of his exes put together, that he had waited such a long time for me, that I was a fantasy. I would wake up sometimes to find that he had texted me in the middle of the night to tell me he was thinking about me and how happy he was. He told me he had, like, no doubts about us. Like, very soon after he told me that I was his girlfriend, he started talking about the future. Like, he was like, for our first anniversary, I want to go back to that restaurant that we went to on our first date. Like, this is 7 dates in. I think, like a month or two after we had met, like, and he's already planning our first anniversary. Our relationship was hypersexual, like, from beginning to end. That never changed. Every time we got together, we would have sex, like, 2 or 3 times at least. He was very touchy, even outside of that. So we were always holding hands, or he was rubbing my arm. We were sitting together, like, he'd have my legs in his lap, rubbing my legs. In the beginning, it just really seemed like he could not get enough of me in every way. And, I mean, he was up on a pedestal, too. I just thought, like, he was the most fantastic person that I had ever met. He was, like, the funniest and smartest and most interesting and coolest. And, I was, just totally, like, head over heels for him. And right around the time that that he decided that I was his girlfriend, he told me that he had told Jeff about us. And he's like, yeah, Jeff said you're like a super friendly, nice girl. So I felt like relieved. I was like, oh, good. Like, that's over. You know, we were worried what his reaction might be. And so it seems like it was a good reaction. So, you know, I expected like, you know, I might get like an email from Jeff at work being like, haha, like I heard that you're dating my brother, you know, or like some sort of like awkward conversation, and we'd have a laugh about it. And at that point I had also started to learn sign language. So I was like, you know, I'm in a committed relationship with this person now. I really like him. Things are looking good. We're talking about the future. Like American Sign Language is the language that he uses to communicate. So, you know, I want to learn that because I don't want to be writing notes back and forth or typing notes on our phones every time we get together. And so, you know, I'd watch videos on YouTube, or, you know, there's websites that you can go to learn sign language. We were using an app called Glide to message each other. It's basically like a messaging app, but you send videos instead of texts. And so, like, yeah, in that, you know, the beginning, things seemed like awesome. We were both really into each other. But then, like, he started planting, like, little seeds of doubt. And just, like, the way that he manipulated me was always kind of the same. So, like, for example, one night we're texting and, you know, instead of our usual, like, super long conversation, he's taking forever to get back to my texts and kind of give me, like, 1 or 2 word answers. So I ask him, like, is everything okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm just busy. And then the next day we was back to normal. So I was like, okay, like, you know, people get busy. I didn't really think anything of it. And it was like a week later, and he texts me and he's like, you know, I just want to apologize for the other night when I was busy. You know, I made you worry and I feel really bad about that. And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, you were busy. And he's like, yeah, you know, the reason that I was busy is because an ex-girlfriend of mine had emailed me. So this was the woman that he had gone out with right before me, the one that he had been in love with, but who wouldn't commit to him.
This is the question I had for you, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
Because I've been wanting to say some things for a while.
Okay, go for it.
So, on that note of this woman, I wrote down here, did you ever meet any of these exes, number 1? And 2, do you think these exes are people that went on dates with him and he presented his 10-date trial and they said no to it immediately? And that's when their relationship ended because, you know, after 7 dates, you were already his girlfriend. So maybe in his mind, you know, he was on maybe date 3 with them when he threw that out there. In his mind, he could have called them his girlfriend, but really just someone he went on a date with, and then he became friends with them after. Is that a possibility we're thinking about? Because that whole 10-date thing always, like, this is the second time I've heard it. It still blows my mind. He was auditioning. It was his own Bachelor episode, like his own little TV show. So do you think that's kind of the thing? And you were someone who just, you know, you had this full month of conversation with them. You were love bombed. You gave him the benefit of the doubt and you went along with it. Is that something that in your mind think that was something that happened?
So, I mean, that is a good question. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I never met any of his friends or family except for his brother. And that's because I worked with him. All I know about his ex-girlfriends is what he told me. Mm-hmm. I know that there were pictures of them on Facebook, so I saw some of them. He told me each of his relationships seemed to last around 2 years. So he told me that all of these ex-girlfriends that he is still friends with were all like 2-year relationships, that he had like, most of them had kids, so he had like met their kids, and that they'd all sort of like, that he had made sure that they ended on good terms. So that is what he told me. I don't know if he has exes out there that hate his guts, and he just didn't tell me about them. I have no idea what his relationships were like with his other exes, he presents it as like he was totally in love with them. Everything was great due to whatever circumstance. Usually, like, they didn't want him for some reason. They broke up, but they were friends afterwards. So I think it's probably likely that it was more than just the 10 dates, that they went out for a substantial amount of time, but I honestly have no clue.
Okay.
Because the only information I have about his past is from him. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that is presented in a light that is favorable to him.
All right, so I'm sorry for interrupting. Where were you in the story?
He's where was I? Oh, yeah, right. So he's texting me saying, like, he's really sorry that he made me worry, but he was busy because an ex-girlfriend of his had sent him an email, and she wanted to be friends again, and I think, he had to talk to her because she wanted to sleep with him, and he had to tell her that he couldn't because he was with me. And so, like, obviously, I'm feeling insecure. Like, this, person that I'm with brushed me off to talk to a woman who admittedly he was in love with but couldn't be with because she didn't want to be, and now he's brushing me off to talk to her about the fact that they're discussing whether they can sleep together or not. So I'm like, I'm feeling insecure, and then he says that he has a question for me, and then there's a long pause, which he always did. He never asked questions, like anything about me. So I knew, like, if he did, it was going to be something important, but he always, like, have these long pauses. So, like, of course I'm anxious, like, oh my God, what's he going to ask me? And then he asks, in my previous relationships, like, was I usually the one that broke up with my partners, or did they usually break up with me? And, and then, I answered, and he's like, yeah, I just assume, like, because you're so awesome, like, you were always the one that broke up with them. But it's just, like, that is, like, such a typical conversation for us. He sort of, like, comes in like the good guy, like, I'm really sorry I made you worry, and then, like, plants, like, a bunch of insecurities, let's talk about breaking up a bit, and then, like, ends the conversation, but, like, oh my God, like, but you're the best, like, I'm so happy to be with you. Like, those types of conversations just happened all the time. So, he started, like, at the beginning, it wasn't as frequent, but he was starting to get, like, sort of hot and cold. So some days he would still be, like, over the top, over the moon, and then the next day he seemed, like, almost annoyed by me, like, annoyed by that I was texting him all the time, and he'd be, like, short answering or ignoring me. And our conversations were changing too. So at the beginning, he's giving me, like, tons of personal details, but the conversation sort of shifted and started becoming, like, very superficial. So we were still texting all day, but, like, now all we were talking about is, like, what he was eating, what game he was playing, like, what he was watching on TV. And he never asked me about me, like, even to ask how I was doing, ever. It was just, like, he would give me an update on him, and then that was it. If I did talk about me, like, text about me, he'd just say, like, cool, or he'd change the subject or end the conversation, or text back, like, oh, you can tell me about that another day. Like, the conversation was just shut down if I tried to talk about myself. If I brought up anything that I liked, it was sort of the same as on our first date. Like, when I was talking about the tattoo, like, he just didn't care. Like, not impressed, not interested, didn't want to talk about it. He never gave me any genuine compliments. So if I'd ask him, like, what do you like about me? He'd say, like, oh, he liked how I made him feel. He liked how much I liked to please him. Or, like, he liked how I made him feel attractive. But it was never anything about me as a person. It was all about, like, how I made him feel. And it started to bug me. Like, when we first met, I thought he's so positive. Like, he's never stressed out. Everything just, like, rolls off his back. But now, like, I was starting to realize, I'm like, that's not really positivity. Like, he just lacked emotion. Like, I never saw him sad. I never saw him stressed or worried or angry or happy or excited or anything. He just sort of existed in this emotionless state. It's really hard to describe. Just completely, like, I guess almost like a robot, like just nothing. Even if you brought up something that he should have been bothered by, he was just like, like just shrugged everything off, like nothing bugged him ever.
I wrote that line down. He existed in an emotionless state.
Yeah, always though, always. Everything was always on his schedule and according to his plans. So like what days we saw each other, like how much time we spent together, what we did when we were together. If I suggested like seeing each other an extra day or on a different day, it was like, no, that's not going to happen. He was always too busy or too tired or just didn't feel like it. Like it was all him and what he wanted. And he never called me by my name ever. It was always like babe or baby or cutie or hun. Near the end of our relationship, he actually gave me the nickname Ruby. And the reason that he gave me that nickname is it's short for Rubik's Cube. And I'm sort of skipping ahead, but we ended up breaking up 3 times and getting back together. But so he said that I was like his Rubik's Cube because he liked scrambling me up and then putting me back together and then scrambling me up again. And he said, it's fun because every time the scrambles are different.
Wow.
And I thought that is the most self-aware thing I think that's the only self-aware thing I ever heard him say. But also, like, he just had no shame about it. Like, he basically admitted to me that he was fucking with me. And then he made a nickname out of it, and that's what he called me. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, anyways, moving on.
I'm shocked that is shock. That is, I've heard a lot on this show. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. When he said that, I was like, does that mean what I think it means? I don't know how else to interpret that. So I choose to believe that he was aware of what he was like. I know a lot of times when people are in these relationships, like one of the questions is like, do you think they know what they're doing? And based on that, I think he did. I think he was fully aware, and he obviously didn't care because, I mean, that's just rubbing it in my face, right?
Yes.
But, yeah, so he never tried to impress me. Like he never cleaned up his apartment before I came over. He never dressed up when we got together. It was just kind of like, this is me, like, take it or leave it. He constantly complained about how far away I lived, not how far away we were from each other, but how far away I lived. And he would say things like, that he was so lucky that I was his girlfriend and that we were going out because I would drive to see him. And he's like, told me like, he sure wouldn't do that for me. So like, he was so lucky that like I was willing to do that for him. And then,
can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because I'm still stuck on this Rubik's Cube thing. Because we didn't discuss this before.
Right.
When he says this, at this point in your own mind, how confused are you?
So he gave me that nickname close to the end. It was after we got back together for the 3rd time. And at that point, I knew like who he was. Okay. And like, I think it was more like just confirmation. Like, yeah, I know this guy is screwing with me and I know he doesn't care. And now he's like basically admitting it to me. But yeah, I don't.
It's like an evil, sadistic person in a comic book movie, and he's the villain, and at the end he tells you his plan or what's going on in a way. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions about, now with some distance and perspective, I have a lot of questions for myself about what I accepted and why. That is definitely one thing where I was like, why was that okay? Like, why, when he actually admitted it to you, did you not just leave? But I think at that point, I mean, I was so deep in it.
Oh yeah, you were super deep in it. Like you were love bombed to another degree. Yeah. The whole like the whole thing at the beginning with like the constant contact, you had no chance. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the oxytocin was flowing, man. I was like, I was in it. Yeah. So. So he, throughout our relationship, was very critical of my sign language skill. So he would make really disparaging comments about hearing people, and he would tell me a lot like how hearing people signing sucks. He would show me comments in his online deaf groups where like other deaf people were talking about how much they hate hearing people, and then he would kind of like just look at me and smile and wait for my reaction. And I was like, like, why would you show me that? I know that that sentiment exists within the deaf community. Not from everybody, but, it's just like a hurtful thing for him to show me. When I was trying to sign with him, like he always just looked like really annoyed. Sometimes he would look away, or he'd just sort of like nod dismissively and then walk away. Like he was just super not encouraging. He never like offered to work on it together. He never even really like acknowledged if I was improving or learning. If I was struggling, like if we were having a conversation and I couldn't think of how to express myself, he'd just sit there and watch me. And it was just like, honestly, it was just humiliating because I'm an intelligent person and I was putting real effort into, like, it's an entirely new language. Sign language isn't just signed English. It's got its own syntax, its own structure, and its own vocabulary. And so, like, I'm trying to learn this language to improve the communication in a relationship that's really important to me. And he just was really critical about it. Like, I never felt supported or like he wanted to help or work on it together. At one point he gave me a quota. So he told me like he told me he expected me to send a certain number of glides every day and that they had to contain at least 2 new signs that I hadn't used before. So now, like, it was almost like an assignment, and he would get upset with me if I didn't meet the quota. By this point, like, I was talking to my friends about him and stuff, and a friend of mine mentioned that she knew someone, a guy who had started dating a deaf girl and learned sign language, and she was talking about, like, how romantic it was, and so I kind of had that in the back of my head, like, yeah, like, what I'm doing is really romantic, like, I'm learning a whole new language for, like, this person that I'm falling in love with. But it didn't feel romantic. Like, it felt really uncomfortable and awkward. And I always felt like shame and responsibility for not being better. Like, it seemed like the expectation was that I would be better than I was, even though he knew when we first started dating, I didn't know how to sign. But I started using, like, language and culture barriers as like an umbrella for everything that was, all the things that were wrong in our relationship. So I would be like, well, of course things feel off. Like, we can't have a proper conversation in person. And, text messaging is not ideal. There's lots of like nuance lost. So it's like, of course, this doesn't feel like a normal relationship because, we're struggling with this communication piece. Like, he never wanted me to meet his friends and family. And I was like, well, of course he doesn't. Like, I can't sign. Like, that would be, a challenging situation for me to go spend time with him and all of his friends if I can't understand what they're saying and I can't express myself. Whenever I would like laugh or like, try and tell him something funny. Like, he never found anything funny that I did. And I was like, well, maybe it's like a cultural thing, deaf humor is different than hearing humor. And so, I just need to be more sensitive and like understand that, he's not going to find everything funny that I find funny. And I totally took on like all the responsibility to improve our communication. So if we were having a conversation and it was challenging, it was like, well, that's because I didn't learn enough, or like, I'm not trying hard enough. And I really, like, I felt super anxious when we were together. Like, I would really almost feel like dread leading up to our dates. And I was like, well, of course I feel anxious. Like, it's stressful having to communicate and, with like my limited language skills. But by the end of the relationship, like, my signing skills were quite a bit stronger. Like, I could definitely understand what he was saying, and my expressive skills were getting better. Like, we could have an entire conversation in sign language by the end. And I actually ended up, right before we broke up, I signed up for an ASL class at Gallaudet University, which is the deaf university in Washington, D.C. And that was really eye-opening because all of my instructors and TAs were deaf. And I was really shocked. I was like, why are they being so nice to me? Like, deaf people hate hearing people. Like, why are they helping me out when there's a word that I don't know? And they were giving me all this feedback. They're like, why are you taking an ASL class? Like, your signing is excellent. I got 100% on my midterm, and my instructor actually emailed me. She's like, your skills are beyond excellent. Like, and so I was like, like, maybe it's not that I don't have the skill to communicate with this man. Like, maybe it's that he's like shutting down our conversations. And I kind of almost wonder, like, so when we were going out, he'd always tell me, like, you're going to be my last hearing girlfriend. I'm done with hearing girlfriends. Like, my next girlfriend's going to be deaf. And I kind of wonder if he purposely chose hearing, like a hearing girlfriend, because it created like that power imbalance. Like, I couldn't communicate with him. And maybe that's why he wasn't super encouraging of me learning, because he didn't want me to. Like, he didn't want that level playing field. I don't know. That's just speculation.
Did his brother ever have an issue with your signing?
I've never communicated to his brother, so I don't know.
So what happened with his brother?
So, so I'm just, I'm just about to get to that.
Oh, okay.
I just like, so the only other thing that I wanted to mention about our relationship, especially in the beginning, was that my ex hit me a lot, like probably almost every time we were together. The first time he did it was on our second date. And then it was, probably almost every time that we got together after that. Mostly he would slap me in the face. And it was hard, like it hurt. He would hit me so hard that like my ears would be ringing. And there were times that he left bruises. Sometimes he would like choke me by sort of like holding his arm across my throat. And it's confusing to talk about because he never did it out of anger. He was never mad, ever. And it was never like out of retaliation for something I did. It just like sort of happened. He never apologized for it. He never asked ahead of time if it was okay. A lot of times it would be like during sex or while we were kissing, but not always. He spat on me during sex sometimes. And it's confusing to talk about because I never brought it up either. Like, he never discussed it. He never said, is this okay? He never apologized afterwards. He never mentioned it. I never mentioned it. That log that I was talking about earlier where he was keeping track of all of our dates, he would write it in there. Like, he would say, like, slapped in the face. So it wasn't something that he was, like, hiding. And, I don't know. Yeah, that's something that I need to think about, I think, is why I let that happen without saying anything. Anyways, his brother. So initially, he had told me his brother said that, I was a super nice person and I was like feeling really positive about things. He told, my ex told me, so like he was going to try and respect each of our boundaries by not talking too much about us to each other. And I was like, awesome. Like, yeah, that seems like a good idea. I totally understand that. But then, it was starting to cause, problems. So my ex was reporting back to me that Jeff was upset because, my ex wasn't sharing details about his relationship with him and they had always been super close. And now all of a sudden they weren't talking. These conversations about his brother were happening, I'm going to say like once or twice a week. So this wasn't like every so often. This was like a constant, like almost constant topic of conversation. My ex was telling me like he was so stressed about not being able to be open with his brother, sort of implying like I was driving a wedge between them. He told me that Jeff wasn't happy we were dating. Jeff was upset because my ex wasn't spending as much time with him because now he was spending so much time with me. Eventually it got to the point where he was telling me that Jeff hated me. And I was just like, he doesn't even know me. So at this point, Jeff and I have not had a conversation, not in person, not by email, nothing. Like, he has not acknowledged that I'm dating his brother. I have not spoken to him or communicated with him that I'm dating his brother. And at work, things were starting to get weird. So, like, Jeff stopped acknowledging me. So, like, if I passed him in the hallway, like, he'd sort of turn his head or avoid making eye contact. He would sit down right next to me in the lunchroom, like, not even acknowledge me. There were times, like, if I was walking into the office behind him, and I know he saw me, he'd, like, walk through the door and let it just close in my face. So he was very blatantly, like, making a point of ignoring me, basically. Jeff was also reporting back to my ex what I was saying and doing at work. So, like, I'd mentioned something in a team meeting, and then I get a text from my ex that night asking me questions about it. Jeff would email, or Jeff would tell my ex that, I tried to wave at Megan today and she's ignoring me. Like, I'm trying to be so friendly and she's not. And so then my ex would be texting me, like, what's going on at work? My brother's telling me that, he's trying to be friendly to you and you're ignoring him. And so I'm like, whoa, like, this is just, like, escalating, right? I'm like, okay, I haven't even had a conversation with Jeff at all. And so I'm trying to sort of, like, do some damage control and fix this. And so I tell my ex, like, look, I've got no problem with you talking to your brother about this relationship. Like, tell him anything you want. Tell him about our relationship, talk about our sex life, like, whatever you would have talked to him about before, I'm fine with it. Like, I appreciate this is a different situation, but like, it's important to me that you and your brother, like, that our relationship not affect the relationship you have with your brother. And he was like, my ex was just like, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I just want it to be like you and me. I don't want to involve anybody else. I don't want to involve my brother. I don't want to involve my family, just really, like, first of all, isolating us, but also just, putting, like, this guilt on me for, this dynamic with his brother that was changing. But while my ex is telling me that he's, doing all of this to respect everybody's boundaries, he would tell me really personal and intimate things about his brother and then tell me, oh, but Jeff doesn't want you to know that. So, he'd tell me something about, like, his relationship or something and then show me a text where Jeff was saying, like, don't tell me. So I just felt, like, awful because I'm like, oh my God, I'm unwittingly violating Jeff's boundaries now, and I'm keeping secrets that I didn't even want in the first place. And so I'm just, and things are all weird and uncomfortable at work. And so I would talk to my ex and I'd be like, look, I want to fix this. Like, I'm going to talk to your brother. Like, let's just sort this. This is just a misunderstanding. Because this is, like, months and months and months had gone by at this point. And, like, things were not getting any better. And I'm like, why don't, I'll just talk to him. Like, he seems like a reasonable guy. And my ex was like, absolutely not. I do not want you guys talking to each other. Like, he would be, like, just, like, adamant. Like, he does not want me and his brother communicating. But yeah, so, but then at the same time, sort of like he was sort of like, yeah, I'll arrange a time for all three of us to meet. So, like, you guys can meet properly. And, I'm talked to Jeff and I told him, like, this is really starting to affect our relationship. But I mean, at work, like, it was just so uncomfortable and so stressful. I was, like, trying to catch Jeff's eye when we passed in the hallway or try to, like, wave at him in the lunchroom, and he just, like, shut it down. And then I'd get, like, a text that night saying, like, that I was the one ignoring him. And so I just started trying to avoid him. I stopped having lunch with my friends in the lunchroom. I would just, like, wait till everybody else was done, get my lunch and eat alone in my office. And really just avoided leaving my office at all because I didn't want to bump into him. Like, I just didn't want this conflict to continue, and I didn't know how to fix it, but, I sort of felt like I was causing it because it's like everybody was sort of blaming me for it, and I didn't. But then when I suggested fixing it, it was like, well, no, we can't do that. So, I started talking to my friends, like, look, like, I'm in this relationship and something's off. Like, something's weird here. Like, this guy I'm seeing is like really hot and cold, and, I'm getting like a weird vibe from him, and like Jeff's acting really weird. And my friends were just like, no, like, oh, Jeff would never let you go out with his brother if there was anything like off about him, and like sort of made me feel like I was imagining, like, Jeff's such a nice guy, like sort of like, oh, I'm sure you're just imagining things, like. And I think because he was like so quiet, I think everybody just sort of like assumed that he's like a super nice guy. But I'm like, but none of us know him. Like, but so I started feeling frustrated because everywhere I turned, people were telling me like it's in my head, or like it's something I'm doing. And I sort of felt like, am I just like seeking drama? Like, I don't know, like, is this just me like perceiving things to be like different than they are? And then, so I'm, spending lunch hours in my office eating by myself. And then my friends are like, oh, like Jeff came in and had lunch with us today. And, we were signing with each other. And yeah, he seemed like super happy and chatty with us. And oh, he was asking about you. And I'm like, so he's having lunch with my friends, asking about, like, if he has questions about me, why doesn't he ask me? Like, and so I was just like, I felt like I was going crazy. Like, I was just like, I don't know what's going on. Clearly, I'm not managing this situation well. So I'm like, I'm going to send him an email. So I didn't tell my ex, so I'm emailing Jeff, and I'm like, look, I am sincerely sorry if I've ever appeared unfriendly. Like, this is a really difficult situation. I was trying to respect everybody's boundaries, but I don't think I've been doing a very good job of it. And it was never my intention to make you uncomfortable at work. And he emailed me back, and his response was, I wish you the best in your personal and professional life. And I was like, okay, like, that was me extending the olive branch. I can't do any more than that. So, eventually I just sort of gave up. But, Jeff was definitely like the third person in that relationship. Like, there was this duality where, I was going to work trying to figure out what I had done to Jeff to make him dislike me so much, and, work on that. Because, it's, first of all, was the brother of someone who I was in a relationship with and who I cared about. And also, it's like, that's my job. That I was spending 8 hours a day there. I didn't want to be hiding in my office all the time and feeling anxious and uncomfortable. So, I have this situation going on at work where I'm trying to figure out Jeff, trying to figure out, how to fix that situation. And then I go home, and then I have my ex, who's also doing like, the hot and cold, and, becoming more and more distant. And, he was starting to cancel dates and telling me that he felt really stressed when we had plans to get together. And the love bombing had basically stopped at that point. And, eventually, he just stopped answering my texts altogether. And I remember one night I just texted him. I was like, is it over? And he responded, I guess so. And then he was like, I totally understand if you're mad at me. If sometime down the road you want to say hi, you should. And then, I was just like in shock, basically, that this relationship was over. And then it was like 5 minutes after that, he texted me saying like, wow, I feel really relieved now that we've broken up. And I was just like, who is this person? Like, it was just so cold. Like, what a cruel thing to say. And this is after, like, all the effort that he put into telling me, like, what we have is real, and, like, planning the future and everything else, just like, that he's relieved. Like, so anyways, that first breakup was horrible. I ended up taking a medical leave from work. I'm seeing a counselor, went on antidepressants. I was like in like physical withdrawal, like throwing up and just shaky. My emotions were like just out of control. And it was about a week after we broke up. I was like just in shock and denial. And I texted him just to ask how he was doing. And he texted back, this girl I was just talking to ended things because she was upset that I still had pictures of my exes on Facebook. Weird. And I was like, why would you tell me that? And he replied, because it just happened. And so I asked him, I'm like, are you sad? Do you miss me? And he replied, no and no. And I was like he was just like gone, just like cold. And I was like,
did you ever get hoovered back or no?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So it was about a month later. And he texted me and was like, I don't always have to be the one to initiate texts. And then, I miss you and I hope I hear from you. So we ended up getting back together. The next time we went out for about 3 months. I mean, it was the same thing. Dynamic at work didn't change. Same, like hot and cold, like everything was the same. He broke up with me again. It was about 4 months, I think. That time we were still in contact after that breakup. After that breakup, he told me that we could keep sleeping together until he found someone else, but that, it probably wouldn't take long, just like giving me a heads up. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So, I mean, I guess I set one boundary. But anyways, so yeah, it was about 4 months. And then we started talking again, got back together again. So this is like the third time we're back together. That was right around my birthday. So I turned 40 earlier this year. And he and I had plans for my birthday that evening. And he stopped responding to my texts for like 2 days before my birthday. So I spent my 40th birthday scrambling, trying to find friends or trying to make plans so I didn't spend the night by myself. For his birthday, he threw himself 3 separate birthday parties. I was not invited to any of them. Shortly after that, I found out he was cheating on me. And I'm pretty sure that he probably was for the duration of all of our relationships. That's just the only time I actually caught him. I would be surprised if that was the only time. Yeah, so I mean, dynamic was the same. Hot and cold, superficial conversations. There's just like no depth or substance at all to our relationship. We never talked about like anything of substance. The situation at work was just not getting any better, so I ended up actually taking a job in another department. So after 10 years in the same position, I left. So I still work in the same organization as his brother, but we don't work in the same department anymore. So I still see him, but just not as frequently as I did before. And he still ignores me, and I mean, that's not going to change. So I mean, but by the end of our relationship, really, like, I was just constantly anxious. It stopped, like, even mattering if it was a good day and he was nice or if it was a bad day and he was cold. Like, I never felt good when he was nice because it never lasted for more than a day. He basically just started ignoring me when he came to visit. He'd sit out on my back porch and he'd post in his social media groups, like, every once in a while come in and show me how many likes he got. But I mean, otherwise, like, just couldn't even be bothered with me. All we talked about was him and what he was doing. I had, like, long since even stopped trying to talk about myself. And I just felt like a zombie. Like, I was just going through the motions. I had no energy. At that point, I had dropped out of school because I didn't have the energy to do anything but ruminate on the relationship. And a couple months before it ended, I started having panic attacks when we would spend the night together. And I honestly, I couldn't even put together why. I was like, this is so weird. Like, I'm so excited to see him. And like, coincidentally, every time he comes over, like, I'm having a panic attack when I'm laying next to him in bed. Like, the fog and the denial was just so deep at that point. And I think it was like the last night that we spent together. And I was like panicking, like my hands were shaking and I was crying. And so he turns on the lights and he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, there's tears streaming down my face. I could hardly even sign. My hands were shaking so bad. And he responded by pulling me underneath him and starting to have sex with me. And so I laid there and had a panic attack while he fucked me. And that's when I was like, yeah, this man, like, he doesn't even see me as a human being. Like, yeah, I think that was, like, the moment when I really realized, like, this is, like, beyond just, he's not just, like, a selfish jerk. or self-absorbed. Like there's something's going on here that's like deeper. Yeah.
So,
and I mean, like,
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that okay? I've been hanging on every word. I've been trying not to interrupt because it's a story that is, I'm sure a lot of people will resonate with it in some ways, but it's also very unusual as far as the circumstances and in other ways.
Right.
And first, I just want to say, there's trauma for you in the situations, the sexual situations, and with the physical abuse, and it's nothing to feel shame about. I know you might, or you possibly do, for
Right.
the role in what happened, and it's nothing that you should, because what has gone on here is not just a master manipulator. You have dealt with someone who has taken their disability, and this is why I've been listening to you and just thinking about it a lot. A lot of people say, like, oh, this person took advantage of someone with a disability, and they vilify that person for, you know what I mean? Like, they took advantage of a senior citizen. Like, look how bad that was. It wasn't just a regular person. Here's someone who's taking advantage of their own disability and using it in such a, I don't even know what the word it should come out of my mouth. It's not even... it's a sadistic way in which he used that disability to hurt you. And it breaks my heart that you had to go through that. And because I think most people in your situation who have empathy and who have a heart and genuinely care for people are going to look at that and say, and give this benefit of the doubt, possibly because of this and what they probably had to go through growing up and everything like that. And this person knew that, and they really targeted you and hurt you. And I really hope that you don't feel guilt and shame. I know it's easier to say for those things than to actually heal that stuff, but it really was no way your fault for anything that happened. And if you think that you take some sort of responsibility for that, don't, because you were manipulated pretty hardcore into that. And it's something that hopefully if you haven't dealt with it, that you do deal with, because, listening to your story and everything about him, I was getting so angry at him just listening to it because of that reason. And, I just want you to hopefully heal that part of you if you haven't attempted to yet, or want to go deeper into that.
Yeah, well, honestly, thank you for saying that. Obviously, as I'm telling this story, there are definitely parts where, I question myself, and I do blame myself, because I'm like, I never told him that wasn't okay. And I don't know.
Don't question yourself. And I'm telling you right now,
yeah.
What he did was terrible, and it was him. It has nothing to do with you. He got your guards down like that. And it's not, sometimes on the show I've said, oh, that person's a master manipulator. In my, right here, this is just not, like, this was, it was very thoughtful and planned out, and he knew what he was doing. This wasn't someone who didn't know what they were doing. And, that's not right. It was, it's borderline. We're talking about, in a way, it's criminal what has gone on. And
I
you were
appreciate
victim of it.
that. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, that's because I do, like, I still, even like, today, like preparing to come on the podcast, I'm like, yeah, I don't even know, like, is this a story? Like, because I still feel like I contributed to it. And in regards to the disability, like, I am mindful that as an able-bodied person, I don't like to dictate to people with disabilities, like how they manage their disability or, how they navigate their lives as a person with a disability. And so, I think I gave him a pass on a lot of behavior because I'm like, I'm not a deaf person. I don't know how, what his experience is in navigating relationships with people who are hearing. And not having experience, I guess, with other deaf people, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe all deaf people do hate all hearing people. Like, I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable about deaf culture. I'm still not. My main exposure is what he exposed me to. And so I was always very careful to not think of, like, he's using his disability to hurt me, or like he's doing this all wrong, because I'm like, I don't get to tell him how he navigates the world as a deaf man.
The only thing you are guilty of is being a good person and being a caring person. And if that's what you are guilty of, then, that's you're a wonderful person. I can hear it in your voice. And that is your strength. And for this person, it was a weakness he went after. And I have the same, my strengths or my weakness is this, everyone is strength usually is their weakness. If you're too nice, sometimes people, and that's what these people do. And so I just really want to say really that none of this had anything to do with you being at fault in any way whatsoever.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've listened to a lot of the other episodes of your show, obviously, before coming on here. And, I appreciate that my story is probably pretty mild in comparison. Like, I feel very lucky that he and I were never more involved than we were. So, we never lived together. We weren't married. We never had kids. But with him, I really, truly feel like it was like death by 1,000 cuts. It was just all the times that he shut down the conversation when I tried to talk about myself, or, all the times he would give me that contemptuous, disdainful look when I was happy, or, the ways he would always let me know that he wasn't sure about me, or I wasn't as good as his exes, or that I wasn't good enough for him. And so I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to come on the podcast and tell this story, because it's like you say at the beginning of the podcast, narcissism is a spectrum. And my ex is he was not a grandiose person. He's an average guy with an average job, average apartment. He's not an angry person. Like I said, to this day, I've never seen him angry. We never had a fight. There were no big dramatic events. I never had to call the police on him. I never had to get a restraining order. He never hit me so hard that I ended up in the hospital. So I think that for me made it harder to recognize what was going on. It made me sort of doubt my own perception, because he really was just sort of masquerading as an shucks nice guy, and maybe sometimes he doesn't have a filter and he says things that are inadvertently hurtful. But it's just the day-to-day sort of covert, manipulative conversations were just so insidious and so cumulative. So after a year and so this whole thing was a year and a half. So in a year and a half, I met him. We broke up 3 times. We got back together twice. I took a 1-month medical leave from work. I quit my job and got a new job. All of that happened in a year and a half. And And yeah, by the time our relationship ended, I just felt worthless, stupid, like unattractive, uninteresting, and like just crazy. The third time he broke up with me, it was the same thing. He was a nice guy. He blamed me for everything. It was my fault that we were breaking up because he just couldn't make me happy. I didn't trust him. He just felt like he was never enough. He never knew what I was thinking. And he asked me, like, how many times does he have to try and, like, to reassure me that, that he wants to be with me? And I'm like, how many times? Like, he has never once apologized or admitted fault for anything he said or did. The first time, after we got back together the first time he was at my house, he started kissing me, and I stopped him and I told him, like, you hurt me. And he just kind of like rolled his eyes and like signed, like, I know. Like, he was just so annoyed that I would even bring it up. Like, he never acknowledged like the hurt that he caused. And that's sort of, I wonder if he's sort of working on that same narrative that he had with some of his exes, like he really loved them and like they just didn't want to be with him. And that's kind of almost what it seemed like when he broke up with me. Like, we are really great, but like, how many times do I have to tell you like that I love you and want to be with you? So, it's like, it's all my fault, right? Because, he's so hurt that he put so much effort into the relationship and I just don't recognize it. So anyways, that's how it ended.
So where are you now in your healing process?
So that was 2 months ago.
So this is really recent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first month sucked. I mean, it was like the same thing, like just physical withdrawals. I just trying to even figure out who I was. Like, I just felt like I was in pieces. Like, I'm like, I don't even know where to begin, starting to put myself back together. Like, I was like lost. Like, I would go to the grocery store and I'm like, what do I buy if I'm not buying what he wants? Like, I don't even know what to watch on TV because, like, what do I choose if it's not based on, what would win his approval? So, I mean, that was really like the first month was just like learning how to function day to day again. This is the end of month 2. So we broke up on Independence Day. So that was a little bit over 2 months ago. And so things are better now. Like, my emotions are stabilized. I am going to be taking part in a 12-week support group for women who are in abusive relationships or who have been in abusive relationships. So I think that will be helpful just to hear like other people's experiences and just, I don't know, maybe it will make me feel less crazy. Right now I feel crazy. I feel like some days I feel like the whole thing was my fault and I'm blowing it way out of proportion. Other days I'm like, no, he's like a complete sociopath. And, some days I have like a ton of compassion for him. Other days I'm just so mad at him, like I'm shaking. So I'm still working on perspective.
Well, it's only been 2 months and
Right.
It's going to take longer than 2 months. You're going to go through this period where you're still confused about everything that happened. You're starting to feel shame and guilt, which has been there, anger. You're going to be angry for a while. Oh, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but in my experience, that's going to happen. And it's going to be a process for you. And it's not something, your situation was, you were pretty deep in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff happened and a lot of traumatic stuff happened. So I hope that you are able to get trauma help. If you want to talk with me off the podcast here and there, I'd love to. If you want to,
Okay.
we can discuss that, and we can just sit and talk, and you can just talk through things, and we can do something like that if you want.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And so you're going to do the support group. Are you going to go see a therapist? Can you afford to see a therapist?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
So I have an appointment this weekend actually to meet a therapist, and she specializes in like trauma and PTSD. I don't even know, like I'm not diagnosing myself or like giving myself any labels, but I do know that I spend a lot of my day feeling very confused, and I'm very reactionary to things. Like I get startled really easily. I get it's really difficult for me to deal with people some days. And so I'm definitely going to do like the one-on-one counseling as well.
Yeah, a lot's happened. It was a year and a half, but a lot of different manipulations happened with you from all different directions.
Right.
So there's a lot for you to unpack and understand, because there was just, you got onslaughted in, so like at work. That's just another element. It's just very confusing. The like circumstances that this guy's brother was there, zero protection on either end. Your world was literally turned upside down with no breather in any direction, complete confusion. The people at work who you went for validation of this is crazy didn't validate what was going on, making you think you were even crazier.
Right.
And I mean, the first line of defense you went to were for these people, and you failed. So not you failed, they failed you in that sense. But I don't know. I'm not going to blame them, because I'm sure they just saw one aspect of things. But you got the runaround in all different directions, and the fact that you're sitting here and talking to me right now, in my mind, is amazing. So.
Thank you. That's so nice of you to say.
So I'm just thank you for coming on the show and being part of this, and I hope that we can chat after. And do you have any parting words before we sign off here?
Yeah, so I guess, like, when I was going through all of this, like you just said, like I felt like I was crazy. People weren't really validating what I was experiencing, and I really had a ton of self-doubt about what was going on, because these people aren't just mean people. They, it's very intermittent, and there's lots of times where you have totally normal days, or they're being really kind to you, and it can be very confusing. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, what I really wanted to focus on were like the red flags and, the things that I noticed that I sort of brushed away or made excuses about, and how I really, my inner voice was screaming at me the entire time, like, get away. This is wrong. This is not okay. I mentioned like how anxious and how much dread I would feel spending time with him. And, like, I've spent time with people, like, we've all been around people who are kind of jerks or people who are selfish, but this was different. Like, in hindsight, when I was with him, like, my blood ran cold. He was missing something. Like, there was a humanity that was missing to him. And I knew that. And so I hope that if there's anybody listening to this who's in a dynamic with a person and they're, they feel like something's off, it's like, just check in with yourself, like check in early, check in often. If, this relationship or this dynamic is consuming you, if it's all you're thinking about, if you're spending every day crying, if it's, this person is all you can think about or talk about, if this is, the only topic of conversation you have with your friends, like, just trust your gut. And I promise you, as scary as it is to leave, like, I'm still a mess. I'm not in a great place right now, but it is a million times better than where I was when I was with him. And so I hope that, I don't know, if there's anybody listening, like, I believe you, what you are experiencing, your perception is real. Like, what you perceive is happening is happening. And that's it.
Well, thank you for being on the show, Annie.
Thank you.
And for everyone else out there, have a good night. And that was my conversation with Annie. And I told you that you had not heard it all before. And for those of you out there that felt like that sounded extreme or different from your story, I just want to remind you that it's still, in the essence of that story, it's still the same at the core. So if you're feeling guilt or shame about what happened to you, please do your best and take it easy on yourself, because just like Annie, you did nothing wrong when it comes to narcissistic abuse. So again, I just want to thank Annie for being on the show, for being brave enough to tell her story. And a big shout out to Annie. And hopefully I hear back from you soon and we keep in touch. Besides that, before I leave here today, I just want to remind everyone we created a Facebook group, which is different from our Facebook page. It's more interactive, so everyone can be involved. And our Facebook page is facebook.com/groups/narcissistapocalypse if you want to join our page. And another reminder, if you want to interact with us on Reddit at reddit.com, you can go to our subreddit, which is Narcissist Apocalypse. It's a capital N and Narcissist and a capital A on Apocalypse if you want to talk to us there. Also, again, one last time, if you want to record a letter to your narcissist for our Letter to Your Narcissist episode, go to our website, narcissistapocalypse.com. On the right side of the page, there will be a button that's floating around that says Send Voicemail. Click on that button, record your letter to a narcissist. If it takes you more than one, because it's only 5 minutes long per voicemail, record a second part or a third part, as many as you need. Send it away, and we'll stitch it together for that episode, our volume 2 of that episode. If you don't want to read your letter and you want myself or Melissa to read your letter, send us an email to narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com, and we will take your letter. You send it to us in some sort of Pages file or a Word document file, and we will read your letter on that episode as well. And I can't wait for that episode to take place. We just need as many letters as we can get to create that episode. And now that's it. The show is over. So until next episode, for everyone out there in the Narcissist Apocalypse community, I just wish you a good week and take care of yourselves.